Então pessoal, olá a todos. Eu hoje vou postar uma pequena conversa, porque foi pequena porque eu não sabia que o Zoom só havia uma hora grátis. Mas pronto, consegui falar com o professor Richard Weikart, que é o autor deste livro aqui, de Darwin a Hitler. É um dos principais autores sobre o social-darwinismo, de como as ideias sociais darwinistas, sobre a competição e sobre a competição pelo mais forte, a luta pelo mais forte, influenciou as ideias de Adolf Hitler. Foi um prazer falar com Richard Weikart. A entrevista vai estar em inglês, mas vocês vão ter legendas em português. Ok, pessoal? E aviso já também, desculpem pelo meu inglês, que não é dos melhores, e não por cima, quando se está a falar com um professor daqueles, o nervosismo fica um bocado, então até me esqueço as palavras, mas fiquem com o vídeo, vai ter legendas, e é este o meu objetivo, é trazer conteúdo de qualidade para vocês. Não interessa se concordam, se têm outra opinião, mas o meu objetivo é este. Então, fiquem com a entrevista e desculpa de não ser maior, porque eu realmente não sabia que só havia uma hora de Zoom. Mas é isso, pessoal. Até já.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Hi. Yeah, yeah. Now I'm
Okay,
hearing you.
good. Okay, good. Wonderful.
Professor, my English is not very good, so I'm sorry if
Okay.
I cannot say some words, but
Okay, just do
I
your
will
best. Yeah.
try. I will
That's
try.
fine. Just do your best. Yeah.
Yeah, I will do my best. Professor, thanks for being here. I'm a
Yes, you're
big
welcome.
fan.
Glad to do it.
And I follow your work for a few time already,
Okay.
and I have here your book. Look,
Oh yeah, right,
yeah, this is
right.
a Portuguese version.
Darwin to Hitler. Yes, right, right.
Yeah, it's a very good book, and
Thank you.
yeah, Professor, I have some questions.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I have in my cell phone. So let me only see that if it's working.
Okay.
Because I'm recording.
Okay.
So let me only see here. Only yeah, okay. Thanks, Professor. So
Okay. Sure.
the first question is how did social Darwinism ideas develop in Germany from the late 19th century up to Hitler? Because when we see the speech of Adolf Hitler and the book like Mein Kampf, in my opinion, we can see a lot of that ideas of social Darwinism
Sure.
about uh, about the stronger, about the
Mm-hmm.
competition, about a lot of these
Sure.
things. So, in your vision, what you can say to me about this?
Well, yeah, you're right that when you do read Hitler's writings like Mein Kampf, and especially his second book, but Mein Kampf's pretty clear too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But his second book, which is just called his second book because he never published it, he never gave it a title. In both of those, it's very clear that he's buying into ideas that were borrowed from Darwinian biology. He doesn't use the word Darwin or Darwinism anywhere there, but he describes the process. He talks about, especially in the second book, French, in the first chapter, he talks about the fact that biological organisms multiply faster than their food supply, and because of this, there's competition, and that competition then leads to the elimination of those that are weaker or unfit, and use Darwinian terminology. And Darwin, and by the way, Hitler did use a lot of Darwinian terminology. He used terminology like the struggle for existence, which in the German is Kampf ums Dasein. He uses that term a good bit, or Existenzkampf. He uses either of those terms, which just means struggle for existence. He used the term selection quite a bit. And so he does use Darwinian terminology a lot. And if you track that back historically in the German scene, there were a lot of German thinkers that Hitler was borrowing upon. Hitler didn't just get his ideas from one person or something like that. He got his ideas from a whole array of people, but there were a lot of German thinkers in the late 19th century who were embracing the idea of social Darwinism. Now, let me just define what I'm talking about here. The idea of social Darwinism is the idea that when you apply Darwinism to the human species, this means that there's competition between either races or individuals, and some people stressed one, some people stressed the other. But there's some kind of competition that's really a competition to the death. That is, some people are going to survive and reproduce. Some people are going to be killed off in that struggle for existence. And Hitler and many other German thinkers saw races as being the most important part of that competition. So they thought that races were struggling against each other in the struggle for existence, and that because of that, they should favor their own race and try to destroy the other races, essentially, or if not try to destroy, at least they recognize that they would be destroyed at some point because of the competition that was going on. So there were quite a number of thinkers. I mean, Darwin himself embraced some of these ideas. If you read The Descent of Man, Darwin talks about races being in competition. And there's a famous, a fairly prominent letter that he wrote to someone in the 1880s where he talked about the Turkish race, he said, has been beaten hollow in the struggle for existence. And so Darwin believed that the races were in a struggle for existence. And a lot of German thinkers, Ernst Haeckel being the most prominent German Darwinist in the late 19th century, took over those ideas of a racial struggle for existence. And he was actually more racist than Darwin was. And he claimed that different races should actually be divided into different species of humans. He thought there were like 10 different human species based on the races, and that these were then in a Darwinian struggle for existence. And Haeckel, again, was not alone. There were many other German Darwinists and also social thinkers, people who we would call today sociologists. The field of sociology didn't really even exist in the way that it does today back in the 19th century. But people that today we would call sociologists, social thinkers, others were embracing these ideas that humans are in competition, and that these races are competing against each other for scarce resources, and this then is causing the struggle for existence. Now, when we look at how Hitler applied that, and by the way, Hitler was not unique. There were lots of other thinkers applying it the same ways. He believed that this meant that Germans needed to gain more living space, and that term "living space" that Hitler used in the Germanist Lebensraum, that term living space was actually coined by a Darwinian biologist who became a geographer. His name was Friedrich Ratzel. He coined this term Lebensraum, or living space, and he claimed that part of the Darwinian struggle for existence was getting more living space, more land, more territory. And so Hitler, when he's launching these wars for territory, he sees this as part of the Darwinian struggle for existence. He needs more territory to feed the German population so it can expand, and so that the so-called master race, the Aryan or Nordic race, can expand and get rid of these other races.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that in two books of Adolf Hitler, of course, one not was published. I think it was in 1928, the second book. Yes.
Right.
And when we look to there, I think that is very clear, that ideas. But a lot of people say that Mein Kampf is not a book of his ideas, but a politic book. For you, the Mein Kampf, it's like a mix of the two. It's only their vision. It's more politic book. Mein Kampf, it's a vision of Adolf Hitler, or is more a politic book to the people that in that time of Germany?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, parts of Mein Kampf are fictional. When Hitler was talking, for instance, about his own life and development, he makes up all sorts of stories about what he was doing in Vienna and things that are totally false, that we have absolutely no evidence for and are pretty sure that never happened. So there are and Hitler was a liar from the word go. In my book Hitler's Ethic, I have a chapter about Hitler as a liar. So Hitler was a liar. He was a politician. He was wanting to gain political support from people, and so he was willing to lie to do that. So we can't just take everything that Hitler says at face value. However, when we look at Mein Kampf and we look at not only what Hitler said in Mein Kampf, but when we look at what Hitler actually did, and also what he said in private to his close confidants and associates, what we find is that the ideas about social Darwinism that he put forward in Mein Kampf are very consistent with what he said in his speeches, with what he said in private to private individuals. For instance, his private secretary wrote a book later about Hitler's ideas and what he was saying, in the bunkers when he was during World War II and such. And she confirms this, that he was a social Darwinist, that he was promoting these ideas of Darwinian struggle for existence and such. When Hitler gave private speeches, he gave private speeches to army officers uh, when they were graduating from their academy. And in those speeches, he made very clear references to social Darwinism. If you look at what he did, his expansionism, his persecution of people of other races, all these, his persecution of people with disabilities, like a lot of 200,000 Germans were killed by the Nazis during World War II from 1939 to 45. Excuse me, most of them were killed in 1940, actually, to 45. He started the program in 39, but they didn't actually get going with it till 40. But they were killed because they were disabled and they were Germans. But again, that fits into his idea of that they're not fit. They're not part of the fit Aryan race. So if you look at what Hitler did, his deeds were very consistent with some of the views that he put forward in Mein Kampf. And there actually were some people at the time, while Hitler was in power in the early 1930s. Hitler came to power in 1933. After Hitler came to power, there were people who were warning that about Hitler because of what was in Mein Kampf. And there, interestingly, were a lot of politicians and others, British politicians, Americans, others, who were just poo-pooing it and saying, "Oh, Hitler's not a threat. Now that he's in power, he'll settle down. He won't follow those radical ideas of Mein Kampf or anything like that." Only to find out that, of course, he did follow some of those radical ideas of
Yeah,
Mein
yeah,
Kampf. And that's why he launched World War II and began persecuting the Jews and Gypsies and other races during that time.
yeah. I think that Adolf Hitler do everything that is necessary to come to power and then input that idea that he have. So
Right. Well, it's
even
interesting. Let me just say this. There's two uses or functions for propaganda in with people like Hitler and any other politician for that matter. But there's two key uses for propaganda. One is to gain power, to tell and sometimes that means telling the people what they want to hear. So you just tell people what they want to hear, so you want to gain power. But the second use of propaganda is to try to convince people of your own views and to try to win them over so that you can bring them to embrace the views that you embrace as well. And so Hitler sometimes was doing one, sometimes was doing the other. And so we have to judge by what he did, what he said later, what he said to private associates. We have to look at a whole array of evidence to decide which is which, because sometimes Hitler was telling people what he wanted to hear. For instance, let me give another example that gets played on a lot. Hitler made a claim that he was following the Lord Jesus Christ at one point in the
yeah,
1920s while he was campaigning for office. Well, privately, he was not saying that to anyone. Privately, he was saying the exact opposite. And if you look at his writings, his speeches, and everything all together, you find out that no, that was just a lie that he was telling to get political power. He didn't really mean that. And so we have to examine the whole array of evidence. What was Hitler saying in his books, in his speeches, in private, in and what were his actions based on those things?
yeah. I think that Adolf Hitler and the God, it's very like particular because Adolf Hitler said that religion can exist but under the state, right?
Yeah,
So Adolf Hitler tried to put like Jesus Christ like one Nazi, right? So
yeah,
like it was the relationship between Adolf Hitler and the church and like God. And do you think that Adolf Hitler it was a Christian or not? It's only to speeches to the people.
yeah. I've written an entire book on this topic. In fact, my book is called Hitler's Religion. And in that book, I show that in private, Hitler was criticizing Christianity very harshly. Most of the positive comments, by the way, that Hitler made about Christianity were in the 1920s before he came to power. And then once he was in power in the 1930s, he sort of backed off of a lot of the positive rhetoric about Christianity. And again, in private, he was always negative about it. And also, if you look at what he says in Mein Kampf and other places, other speeches too, it becomes clear that he actually deifies nature. And so I argue that Hitler was closest to pantheism, the idea that nature is God, that everything that exists is God. And that actually fits right in with his ideas about social Darwinism because he thought that what was ethical, what was moral, was what helped to drive evolution forward. And so he thought basically nature should determine what morality is. He thought, look at nature, what nature's doing. Nature's this harsh struggle for existence and this competition between the races and such. And so he said, okay, that's what is moral because that's who his God was, that nature was his God. So I argue that nature was his God. And I think there's a lot of evidence that he was anti-Christian. Again, especially if you look at the Goebbels diaries, for example, Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda minister, kept diaries. He
Yeah.
made comments about what Hitler said privately about Christianity. Goebbels was very anti-Christian himself too.
Goebbels like
Uh,
Stalin, right? And the
what's that?
Bolsheviks and Lenin.
Yeah,
Goebbels
they were very
had
anti.
that admiration
Yeah, they
for
were
the
very anti.
Bolsheviks.
Who had admiration for the Bolsheviks?
Goebbels about
He had,
Bolsheviks.
yeah, he had admiration for their tactics, not for their
Yeah,
ideology. Yeah,
yeah,
and so, and in fact, some have argued, and I don't know if this is true or not, but some have argued that Hitler basically borrowed his concentration camp system and things like that from the Soviets. You know, sort of took the ideas from them to apply them. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly clear that they thought that Stalin was using some proper tactics. It's very interesting if you compare, you know, the Nazis on the one hand and the communists on the other hand. They're diametrically opposed ideologically. Hitler hated communism. The communists hated fascism and Nazism. But on the other hand, they're using a lot of the similar tactics in terms of gaining political power, keeping political power, like suppressing the freedom of speech, suppressing religion, suppressing all these other things that Western societies were seeing as sort of civil liberties and human rights.
yeah. But do you think after all these things that Hitler had about these ideas about the strong, the social Darwinism, do you think that in their vision about Adolf Hitler, he think that he was a moral man? Like I have the moral because I believe in these things about social Darwinism, about evolution, and other persons that don't believe they don't deserve to live uh, in my state.
Yeah, actually, yeah. What's interesting, and a lot of people, this sort of takes people aback a little bit when I say this, but Hitler thought that he was doing the morally right thing. And the reason for that is because he bought into a vision of evolutionary ethics. And I argue this position not only in my book From Darwin to Hitler that you mentioned earlier, but I also argue this in the book Hitler's Ethic, that was my follow-up, my sort of sequel to From Darwin to Hitler. In my book, Hitler's Ethic, I argue that Hitler embraced evolutionary ethics. Now, there's two kinds of uh, forms of evolutionary ethics, and Hitler was going to embrace both of these. One idea about evolutionary ethics is that ethics have evolved through the Darwinian struggle for existence and through what helps an organism uh, to survive and reproduce, that this helps them to survive, and that so ethics have evolved over time. And I do believe that Hitler believed that ethics had evolved over time in the Darwinian struggle for existence. The second element of evolutionary ethics, though, is that whatever helps evolution uh, bring organisms to higher forms of existence, that this is ethical. So whatever sort of drives the evolutionary process forward, so to speak, or brings evolutionary progress, this is moral. And Hitler certainly embraced that idea. He believed that by killing off the Jews, he was advancing the human race. He thought that he was promoting evolutionary progress by doing that. And the reason why he thought that, I want to make very clear, he was totally wrong.
Yeah.
He was completely off base with this because of some false presuppositions. But his view was that the Jews were an immoral race, and he thought they were biologically immoral because uh, they didn't have the same evolutionary ethics. They had not evolved these ethical ideas or feelings within them that the Aryan race had, or Nordic race. By the way, the word Aryan and Nordic were used interchangeably by the Nazis during especially the 1930s, to describe the race that they considered the highest race of Europeans. But the Hitler thought the Jews were basically biologically immoral. He thought that they had these biological tendencies to deceitfulness, to sexual immorality, to greed, and all these negative, all these stereotypes that had had been around for centuries about the Jews, but he thought they were biologically ingrained. He didn't think that they were just something that was, a cultural or learned from their parents or something like that. He thought these were biologically ingrained moral characteristics of the Jewish race. And so because of that, he didn't think you could just educate them, to change them. He thought you had to eliminate them one way or another. You could sterilize them, you could stop them from reproducing, or you could kill them, which is what he finally settled on ultimately. At first, he tried to kick him out of the country. That was the first step in the 1930s. And then once the World War came on, then he didn't have that as an option any longer. And so he resorted to killing. So he thought that by killing the Jews, he actually was making the species, not only advancing it in an evolutionary scale, but also making the human race more moral, because he thought the Jews were immoral biologically, and he thought the Aryan or Nordic race was biologically had these tendencies toward loyalty, thriftiness, hardworking, truth telling, all these positive moral traits he thought that the Aryan race had. So he thought that by killing off the Jews, he was actually promoting a higher morality. That's very twisted. I understand that, and I'm obviously I'm not promoting this idea. I'm slamming it, but that is the view that Hitler had.
Yeah, I think that after Adolf Hitler take the power, questions like abortion, for example, Adolf Hitler it was against if it was Aryan race, but if
Hmm.
it was another race, it's good, it's moral.
Right,
That
right.
baby don't born to our society.
Hmm. Hmm.
So what it was Aryan race for Adolf Hitler? Because Aryan race is superior than another races. Okay, but what is Aryan race for
Yeah,
Adolf Hitler?
yeah. The term Aryan race had been used, of course, by quite a number of racial thinkers before Hitler's time. And basically, it was referring to a race, and by Hitler's time, they believe it was referring to the race that had grown up in northern Europe, and they thought it was centered in that day. And by the way, I said they used the word Nordic also as a synonym for Aryan later on, especially the anthropologists. They didn't like the term Aryan so much because it was more a linguistic term. So they used the term Nordic race to describe it. They believed it was a race that was centered in northern Germany and Scandinavia, but they thought there were scatterings of the Nordic race. They thought in Poland and Czechoslovakia and the Netherlands, obviously the British with the Anglo-Saxon influence, they thought had Nordic race in it, and the United States, they thought the North Americans had a lot of Nordic race or Aryan race in them as well. A lot of times they characterize them by being tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and such, but they didn't think you had to have all those characteristics to be at least mostly or partly Aryan. Hitler, of course, had blue eyes, but he didn't have blonde hair. He had dark colored hair. So he didn't really fit completely the stereotype of the Aryans, and nor did some of the other leading Nazis either. But one thing that they sort of got around that with was by saying that what's inside you is more important than what's outside. So they would say that if you're internally an Aryan, if you've got the right Aryan, morality and other kinds of things within you, that can make you an Aryan, and that makes you valuable racially and such. So they it, there was a lot of there was a lot of flexibility in their definition of Aryan. And what's interesting too is that when they started trying to figure out who's Aryan, it became very difficult. They tried to do it with facial types and different things. There's all these facial features that they saw that they thought were could be possibilities. So hold on just a minute. I'm going to have to close my
Yeah,
blinds here. It's getting kind of bright here. Sorry about that.
no
There,
problem.
that's a little better, I think. Okay, so but there is very difficult for them to figure out who was an Aryan, who wasn't, in fact, or who was Nordic and who wasn't. And so there was just to give you an example, there was a competition once, a photo competition of the best Aryan visage or whatever, and the person who won the competition was half Jew, half Jewish. So, so the anthropologists themselves had horrible difficulties in trying to figure out, but they did thought they could do it. The anthropologists thought they could, look at facial types, the cranial types, and they thought they could figure out, who was Nordic. And we say Nordic and Aryan, by the way, they're differentiating them from other European races too. Most of the anthropologists in the 1930s in Germany thought that there were somewhere around 6 to 8 different racial types within Europe, and that's not even including Africa, Asia, and other places like that. So they thought the Nordic or Aryan type they thought was mainly northern Germany and Scandinavia. In the western parts, they had what they called the Western race. They had the East Baltic race to the east and northeast. They thought that most of Russia was actually, they thought they were actually Asian in their orientation. Southern Europe, they thought had different racial types and such. So they had all these different racial types that they were talking about, even within Europe.
Yeah. Do you think that Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels to copy the things that the social Darwinists did before, like said that you are not so good like me because I have a different evolution, so I have right to live because I'm stronger and other things. Do you think that Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler like copy that ideas and the way to put in the society like the social Darwinists before?
Yeah, in fact, I haven't done as much study of Goebbels as I have of Hitler, but they were basically taking these ideas from prominent thinkers that came before them. None of the ideas that Hitler had were original. They were all taken from different German thinkers. And in my book, From Darwin to Hitler, I discuss a whole wide range of these thinkers. And so Hitler's ideas aren't necessarily exactly the same as any one of these thinkers, but you can still identify some very major themes that come out of these social Darwinist thinkers. And again, there were different forms of social Darwinism in the late 19th century. Not all social Darwinist thinkers agreed with each other. Some emphasized the individual struggle for existence within society. Some stressed the struggle for existence between different societies, such as races and such. So there were differences among the many of these thinkers, but Hitler was going to latch on to some of these ideas, and he certainly did borrow them from many of the social Darwinist thinkers that came before his time. And also a lot, what happened too also in the late 19th and right at the beginning of the 20th century is that a lot of the anti-Semitic thinkers, the leading anti-Semitic thinkers in Germany, people like Theodor Fritsch, for example, he was one of the leading anti-Semitic thinkers in Germany, just sold, his books were, just went through like dozens of editions, his books relating to anti-Semitism and such. But Theodor Fritsch and others combined social Darwinism with anti-Semitism before Hitler came on the scene. So Hitler was just borrowing these ideas and taking them from others that had already uh, been in circulation for quite some time. And again, Theodor Fritsch is just one example among many. There were many other anti-Semitic thinkers who were embracing social Darwinism and integrating them into their ideas about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And by the way, I should say this too. In a book that I wrote more recently called Darwinian Racism, I actually have a chapter that looks at the way that neo-Nazis and white nationalists in the United States have taken those ideas. And there's many neo-Nazis in the late 20th century and even on into the 1920s. Excuse me, the 2020s, where we're at today,
Yeah.
who embrace these same ideas, who embrace the idea of there being a racial struggle for existence, and some races are more evolved than others, and because of that, some races are superior to others, and therefore we have a right to discriminate against them and even, do horrible things to them in the name of social Darwinism. So these ideas actually are still around. They're kind of a fringe idea today. Fortunately, I'm glad they're not more widespread, but they do have some traction with some in some circles.
Yeah, I saw a video of you like
Mhm.
15 years ago when you explain how this social Darwinism comes to United States
Mhm.
about the school and a lot of things,
Mhm.
and it's very interesting to see even after Hitler died, some of his ideas could keep going in our society. Of course, it's not the same ideas, but
Mhm.
they try to pretend that don't support that ideas.
Yeah.
Do you think that today we have people not Hitler fan, but that believe in this social Darwinism, like the stronger the competition? We have people in that this time that still believe in these things, or you think that, of course, we have one or another people, but it's very minimum. It's not like before.
Well, I think it's sort of a fringe groups and fringe that those beliefs, but they're there. And if you when I was working on my book on Darwinian racism, I was looking at a bunch of the websites of a lot of white nationalists and thinkers. There was a group known in the United States as the alt-right, which gained some traction back around 2016 or shortly thereafter. Richard Spencer was one of the key figures there, and he was getting some media attention at the time and everything. I think they always have in the the past few decades have been basically fringe groups, but I think they may be gaining a little more traction in our day, uh, especially through the internet. As people begin to put forward these ideas, and some of them are, by the way, are out and out. Some of them are out and out apol uh, pro Hitler in their views and are unabashed about that. Many of them sort of distance themselves from that. I've been very concerned about some figures that have begun to, uh, introduce Holocaust denial and other kinds of things like that, or ideas like that, that just play into the hands of people that want to recycle these bad ideas that Hitler had by claiming that they really didn't lead to the atrocities that they did actually lead to.
Yeah, Professor. Unfortunately, I only have 1 hour in the Zoom, but I really want to thank you because I really enjoy your work, and I never thought that it was possible to talk with you because I see you on YouTube and in the books, and
Mhm.
it's different to talk with you. And
Well,
yeah,
I'm glad we had the opportunity. Yeah.
yeah, and I only have 19, and I already had that chance to talk to you, and it's a pleasure. It's a
Yeah.
really pleasure. So thanks for talk to me,
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
and keep doing books because I will read them all. That is, thanks, Professor.
You're very welcome. Great talking to you.
Thanks.